I'm Ryan, and this is the Sound Project. When we're working on a project, there are multiple people that are involved. So obviously, like, we're acoustical consultants, so we handle the design portion of a project. Oftentimes there's also an architect, a general contractor, there's tradespeople for, the electrical and the HVAC portion of things. And there's also AV integrators. So AV integrators are the portion that I want to focus on today. So a lot of times we will get the question of like, is there certain gear that you recommend? Are there brands that you recommend? And the answer to that is that we stay away from the gear conversation. So while several of us do have like some gear knowledge and like we like the gear, it's one of those things that we want to focus on what we're really good at. And then we want to point to other people that that's their focus. So with AV integrators, they handle a lot in a project, and we work hand in hand for a lot of the project. But we don't handle the gear portion. Like, that's something that a dealer or an integrator is going to handle. So the reason that an AV integrator is so important is there's a lot of times where we will include, conduit runs to figure out or to have like the groundwork laid for making sure that there's conduit for all of your connections being made, maybe from a wall plate to where your interfaces are going to be or any other of your equipment. And an integrator is going to be able to do the full portion of the design when it comes to, okay, these are the lengths of cables that we're going to need. These are the kinds of cabling that we'll need, going from maybe patch bays to outboard gear, or from your patch bay to like a mic plate on a wall or something like that. So what AV integrators do is they do, where we do the design for the build, they're doing the design for all of the equipment. And that's something that is a really, really in-depth process. And again, it's something that we are going to work hand in hand with them on. Just because, like, for us, like, part of our rendering process is knowing what gear is going into the room so that when we do the renderings, we can put that actual equipment into the space, or knowing that in a certain area, like depending on the workflow, that you want to have mic plates maybe closer to your listening position if you're trying to like do more production type things and things like that. So those are all things that an AV integrator is going to help us out with. Along with that, sometimes, like, a lot of people will ask like when the best time to get involved is. And the answer for almost every trade is as early as possible. So for us, like, if we can get in before, if it's a new build, if we can get into a project and get involved before construction starts, then we're able to optimize like the space for room modes. We're able to optimize the overall floor layout and things like that. With an AV integrator, it's kind of the same deal. There have been times where, we've like created a room and said, okay, this is how big the space is going to be. And maybe not quite starting construction, but then it's gotten to a point where we have the room layout done. And then the client talks with an AV integrator after we've already finalized those plans, and we find out, oh, maybe the desk that they want won't fit in the room, or maybe the monitors aren't going to fit properly in the room. And so that's all like a good reason to like bring them in early. And again, it's something that we're going to work hand in hand with them on everything throughout the project. But it just kind of goes back to letting the individuals that are really good at their specific job, like bringing in the right people for that. So that's kind of where the AV integrators will come into play on the, like, on a studio side. There are also going to be integrators for commercial builds and for houses of worship or larger rooms that are venues or event spaces. And it all kind of works out the same way. But depending on like the kind of project that you're working on, especially if you're working on like a large room or something where it's going to be really important for you to have a certain spread for your speakers and things like that, making sure that the entire space is being covered correctly. Those are all things, like those kinds of ease models and things like that are all things that an AV integrator is going to run. They are also going to be available to help out with making sure that your power is correct. So if you have passive speakers, like, you're going to need a certain amount of power to be able to supply to those. And those are all things that the AV integrator is going to help out with. And this is another part where talking about how we work like hand in hand. If it's in a large room where the integrator chose the speakers and such, then we can work with them on, okay, this is where the placement should be, to make sure that acoustically it's working the best, while also working with the AV integrator to make sure that they're achieving the coverage that they want. And that's more so how it would work on the on like the large room and the house of worship side of things. The next one was more of like the conference room thing. So conference rooms or offices, those, like some office buildings, you're getting into like heavy networks, and you're having to get into maybe like security systems and things like that. So that's kind of another level that, again, that's something that we don't have any knowledge on, like security systems or, the networking and things like that. That is all entirely, we lean on the AV integrator for that. So those are all kind of the different, those are just a couple of examples actually of different platforms that an AV integrator is going to be working in. The thing I really want to stress is that AV integrators are, they're the experts in all sorts of different kinds of equipment. So again, you're talking sound, lighting. Some of them do handle like the security side of things, networking, like data transfer, things like that. And AV integrators will be able to, there's a resource for you. So if you're trying to find, maybe you're like, if you're building a new studio, you're building a house of worship, and you have a broadcast studio and a front of house and things like that, the AV integrator is going to be there for you to be able to kind of figure out what your workflow is. Or if you're trying to figure out the best kind of workflow, they're able to be there as an advisor for you throughout that process. And similar to how we provide CAD plans for how to build the space, they are usually providing some kind of plan on, all right, this is where all of your connection points are going. So connection A is going from one thing to connection A to another thing. And that all takes a lot of work and a lot of coordination. There have been studios, and again, like this applies to all studios, houses of worship, in like conference or office buildings, that sometimes there's like Dante networks or some kind of like audio over IP style of equipment. And those are all things that the integrators are going to be specialized in. Another thing that is kind of its own separate thing that integrators are great at is lighting. Lighting plays a huge part in, businesses and houses of worship, where, maybe there's like LED walls, or if it's a venue, there's going to be lights for the concert and things like that. Those are all things that it's just another section of what they do that they are experts in. So again, I really can't stress how important it is to bring them in like early on in a project, just because if you're able to get them in, get their take on like what the workflow of the entire space is going to be, and figure out what the necessities are, especially if it's a larger space where there's multiple rooms, or if it's more like an office building, or if it's a church with multiple rooms in there. It's really important to get them in early so that they can kind of figure out what your workflow for the entire space is, and they're able to kind of hone in on what is the big picture of, like, what's the big picture goal for this space. And then they're able to hone in and find, all right, these are the individual things that we can do to optimize each room the way that you want to, when it comes to the gear and your networks and things like that. So there's tons of integrators that we work with as well. So the next thing that I kind of want to talk about is just how we work with integrators. And again, I kind of said this throughout. It's primarily like we work with them hand in hand throughout the whole project. And so we will incorporate in our plans the conduit runs, and those conduit runs can be based on where the integrator is wanting to place certain gear. So it's one of those that they're specifying all of the gear, they're specifying the connections for the gear itself, and we're just specifying in the design where the conduit will go so that they can run the cabling for whatever equipment they need to. There's a lot of integrators out there, there's like large companies that will travel wherever they need to. And then there's more like smaller local companies. So if you have a favorite integrator, go ahead and comment that down below. And that's been another episode of the S.O.U.N.D Project, and we'll see you next week.